Good evening and welcome to the news at 10. His Majesty King Abdullah discussed Jordanian-Kenyan military ties and means to bolster them with Kenyan Defense Minister Rachel Omamo. The meeting, which was attended by the two countries' army chiefs, also touched on regional and international efforts to fight terrorism holistically. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Lieutenant General Mahmoud Frihat, who also met the Kenyan military delegation, reviewed ways to further cement cooperation between the two countries' armies. His Royal Highness Prince Faisal bin Al-Hussein met a delegation of U.S. congressional aides at Al-Husseiniya Palace. Deputizing for His Majesty, Prince Faisal reviewed the strategic Jordanian-U.S. partnership and ways to further expand cooperation between the two countries. Discussions also touched on Jordan's support of efforts to address various regional issues, the fight against terrorism, and repercussions of the Syrian refugee crisis on Jordan. Separately, Senate President Faisal Faiz, who also met the U.S. congressional aides delegation, urged the international community to fulfill its commitments to Jordan to enable it to continue its humanitarian role towards the refugees. Speaker of the lower house of parliament, Atif Taran, meanwhile briefed the delegation on Jordan's reforms in the political, economic and social fields. Prime Minister Hani al-Mulki met lawmakers from the Al-Wifaq parliamentary bloc as part of the government's policy to reach out to the legislative authority and others to address economic woes. Head of the bloc, MP Mazen al-Qadi, said the current economic hardship, the kingdom's worst in a long time, is not the sole responsibility of the current government, but all the preceding governments since '89, adding that clear economic foundations needed to be laid down. Mulki, who outlined the government's fiscal and structural program, said that economic resilience required financial discipline, a solid fiscal policy and growth through the stimulation of promising sectors. On the sales tax, Mulki said a revision will be made on all subsidies in various sectors to ensure they only reach targeted groups of Jordanians, as about a third of the population or non-Jordanians benefit from them. He also said proposed amendments to the income tax law are aimed to improve the efficiency of tax collection, fight tax evasion, and stiffen the penalty on evaders. To regional news, Turkey must be present in Syria's Idlib province to prevent a wave of migration into Turkey. The country's defense minister said it will provide assistance to rebels it backs as it implements a de-escalation agreement to reduce fighting in Idlib. A Turkish army reconnaissance team scouted the region on Sunday before an expected military operation. Meanwhile, the Russian Defense Ministry released drone footage showing airstrikes against what it said were positions of Daesh terrorists who entered Syria's Deir ez-Zor province from Iraq. Mute black and white footage showed terrorists and APCs hit by Air Force strikes, as well as aftermath of the strikes. Earlier, Russia accused the U.S. of pretending to fight Daesh and of deliberately reducing its airstrikes in Iraq to allow the terrorists to stream into Syria to slow the Russian-backed advance on the Syrian army. Meanwhile, a Russian military jet crashed while taking off from a Russian airbase in Syria, killing its two-man crew. The Sukhoi 24 attack aircraft was heading out on a combat mission, but its crew failed to eject after the plane veered off the runway. The Russian Ministry of Defense said a technical fault may be the reason. Catalan leader Carles Puigdemont proclaimed the region's independence from Spain, but said the effects would be postponed to allow for talks. Addressing the regional parliament, Puigdemont stopped short of seeking the explicit support of the chamber for the declaration of independence in a vote. The Catalan leader said he was convinced that the region's conflict with Spain could be resolved in a negotiated way, adding that it was worth exploring international mediation to resolve the crisis. A declaration of independence would deepen Spain's biggest political crisis since an attempted military coup in 1981 and would almost certainly draw a crackdown from Madrid, possibly including suspension of Catalonia's autonomous government. The Spanish government appealed to Puigdemont to reflect and not to take an irrevocable step by declaring independence. Losing Catalonia, which has its own language and culture, would deprive Spain of a fifth of its economic output and more than a quarter of exports. UNESCO's 58-member executive board are voting for a replacement for the organization's Director General, Irina Bokova, whose 8-year tenure expires at the end of December. The first round of the secret ballot started yesterday at UNESCO headquarters in Paris and will be held every day this week until a candidate can garner the majority support of 30 executive board members. 8 candidates from France, China, Azerbaijan, Vietnam, Egypt, Lebanon, Qatar and Israel are competing. The new Director General will be confirmed at the agency's General Conference in November. To the U.S., where firefighters battled 15 wildfires that have killed at least 13 people and destroyed thousands of homes and businesses in Northern California. Much of the damage and fatalities were in California's wine country north of San Francisco. The fires were fanned by high temperatures and dry conditions, displacing some 20,000 residents, robbing others of power, and forcing schools and at least 2 hospitals in Sonoma County to close. In sports, jubilation turned to disappointment for Syrian soccer fans in Damascus watching their team play in their World Cup qualifier against Australia in Sydney. Though Syria scored first in the 6th minute of the game, Australia quickly equalized before scoring again in the second half of extra time. The visitors were without 5 first-choice players through injury or suspension. And the situation was made more difficult when Syrian midfielder Mahmoud al-Mawas was sent off for a second yellow card 4 minutes into the first period of extra time. Meanwhile, in the capital of Iceland, Reykjavik, soccer fans celebrated after Iceland became the smallest country ever to qualify for the World Cup. Iceland beat Kosovo 2-0 to book a place at their first World Cup in Russia next year. And finally, for a quick look at the weather, it remains relatively cold tonight with partly cloudy skies. As for tomorrow, moderate conditions prevail across the kingdom with northwesterly moderate winds. Amman can expect a high of 24 degrees Celsius, dropping to 13 at night. While in the Gulf of Aqaba, it remains relatively hot with mercury levels at 32 degrees, sliding to 20 at night. And with this, we come to the end of this edition of the news. I'm Alia Tuqan. Thank you for joining us. Join us tomorrow, same time, same place. Good night.